Hi, this is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast, and today we're going to talk about something that is potentially the polar opposite of how we function in the legal world. We function a lot with negativity and injured people whose lives are often catastrophically changed as a result of something that has happened to them. I wanted to shift the focus and talk about being positive. I brought Dr. Paul Jenkins on the show. He's a speaker, author, and a podcast host. He's also a YouTube host and a coach. I met Dr. Jenkins when we were at the National Speakers Association conference, and I've met him over the years, but I had a chance to talk to him this summer about being on the show. He's passionate about positivity and helping people develop the tools and the skills needed to get to that positive point in their lives and in their business. Well, welcome, Paul. Thank you for being part of this show.
Oh, thank you, Pat. I'm so thrilled to join you for this conversation today.
Let's talk about what does it mean to be a positivity expert? That's your title. And it's probably a title that most people listening have not heard before.
Positivity, most people have heard just think positive. Right? I mean, that's thrown around a lot. You'll hear it in speeches or from the motivational gurus from the stage. I'm a psychologist, and it's important to me that we get down to the psychological roots of positivity so that we actually understand what it is. And it's not just this trite, fluffy, motivational phrase that you might hear from the stage. So as an expert in positivity, basically what I've done is spent about the last decade of my career developing models and honing in on what are the psychological principles behind this so that we can really operate the equipment of our own mind more effectively. And that changes every aspect of life when we can do that. So it's fun to be involved in that part of psychology. I have to acknowledge, though, Pat, as I was preparing for this particular interview, now I used to get involved in a lot of forensic work, and I did child custody evaluations for the court, and often I'd be called on as an expert witness in cases of disability, for example, or accidents, or dog bites, or the psychological impact of these unfortunate experiences that we can have. And I know that a lot of your listeners are in that space a lot, where we're assisting to evaluate or to quantify the impact of a medical incident, for example, or a malpractice incident. And here's the disclaimer. I got to throw this out right up front, okay? Because the disclaimer is, if we really apply positivity effectively in our life, then it doesn't matter what happens, we can still choose a positive, joyful experience. Now, that's not necessarily what you want to say on the stand when you've evaluated someone and the impact of one of these experiences in their life, because it honestly does sometimes change the direction of their life. Before the show, Pat, you and I were chatting about some of the potentially catastrophic things that can happen to a person through an accident or a medical incident or a malpractice situation. And it's interesting to me to see that people can experience exactly the same type of an incident with very different outcomes depending on their frame of mind, their paradigm, the way that they choose to reference that in their life. So that might be an interesting conversation to get into, but I think also as helping professionals, it's easy for us to get sucked into negativity mode when that's what we're dealing with on a day in and day out kind of a basis. So there's some important applications here for us as helping professionals to manage the direction of our own mind so that we don't get sucked into something that steals our own joy. And that's why I get passionate about this.
Mm-hmm. One of the last jobs that I had clinically was a medical surgical nurse in a hospital. And I can remember when I was floated to different units that I could walk in and the nurses would be bitching before the change of shift report and sharing the stories about the young mother whose car was parked on the side of the road and a tractor trailer came over right over the top of it. And the night shift didn't clean up their mess and they're making the day shift do it. And I can remember that sensation of leaving that room after the change of shift report was over. And I had the weight of all of this negativity on my shoulders. I had absorbed it all.
Right.
And I had to walk out of the room and just do what I do frequently is I pretend I'm blowing things off because it was contagious. Exactly what you're talking about when you're exposed to death and disability and people who are miserable all the time. It's so easy to get caught up in that.
Oh, yes. It is. And in the energy of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy. And Pat, this is where we are all vulnerable. Because as human beings, we are subject to pain and to disability and to aging and to eventually to death. And I hate to burst the bubble for anybody, but nobody gets out of this alive.
You got it.
Now, we all know this, but it's not something we want to deal with. It's not necessarily a pleasant thing. And when we experience something that's unpleasant or painful, it is really easy from there to conclude that this is a bad thing or this thing shouldn't happen to me. And it's that interpretation that gets us all tied up in knots emotionally. You look at something like death, for example. Should it happen or not? Well, bottom line is it's going to, right?
Yeah.
It's going to. It's a part of what we signed up for when we, hit the planet. This is the reality that we get to deal with. So to look at that as something that's bad doesn't necessarily serve us well, because that creates fear and anxiety and apprehension and that burden, that feeling of heaviness. What if we saw it as perfect for us? This is weird. And the title of my book, Pat, is called Pathological Positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And we know in the industry, the word pathological means disordered,
Right.
or disconnected from reality. In psychology, crazy. And it sounds a little crazy when I suggest this to people, that what we experience is perfect for us. And that goes completely contrary to the arguments that the attorneys are making in a case where they're seeking compensation. And there's a utility for that I think we need to support, because when things happen to people and someone else is culpable for that, I think it's important that there's some equity in the way that plays out. But for the person themselves, or for us as helping professionals, what if we were able to see everything that happened as perfect for us? That would change how we felt about it. Pat, you and I got to chat a few months ago at Influence, which is the event that you referred to for the National Speakers Association. And we both know people, inspiring, powerful people, who are in the position they are because of, not despite or in spite of, but because of some difficulty or adversity that happened to them in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And although we would never wish those kinds of events on anyone, it's the struggle, it's the adversity that actually puts them in a position to be powerfully inspiring speakers or authors, or to share with people that, hey, things can happen in your life and you can still have joy and happiness. See, that comes down to a psychological choice. And I outline some of those principles in my book because, like I said, I don't want this to be a trite, fluffy, just think positive about things.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to see that we have some choice in the matter. We don't always get to choose what happens to us. Sometimes stuff just happens. This young mother that you talked about, gets hit by a truck while she's parked on the side of the road. Some things just happen to us. Once those things happen, then we have choice over what direction our mind takes it. And it can spin us out into a negative cycle that creates more misery and difficulty in our life. Or we can intentionally choose a positive path that allows us to see that as perfect for us. Now, what are we going to do with that? And that's where the power is. You don't get to choose what happens to us.
And it's interesting because in the litigation arena, as you mentioned before, the positive, happy person who sees that this change in my life is perfect for me is not going to be a strong client for a plaintiff attorney who wants that person to experience and articulate a great deal of suffering.
Which helps them to get a better judgment.
Right, exactly. Which helps the attorney make more money, makes more money for the injured person. I worked on a case for an attorney of a woman who was hit when she was getting off the bus coming back from the casino. And when she described how her life had changed, she was minimizing her symptoms, minimizing her problems. The attorney hired me to be her voice to essentially identify the pain that she had, the suffering, the changes in her role, because putting her on the witness stand would not have been valuable in the litigation process. Exactly.
Right.
But she had learned how to cope with the changes that she experienced as a result of being injured.
Which improved her life. Because if we focus on what we can't do, I have a friend who is quadriplegic. And you'd think, okay, well, quadriplegic, wow, that screws up your life, right? Now we can articulate the motor skills that he has lost, that he's not capable of doing, the sensory experience, the way that his body functions, drastically different, and we can articulate and document all of those changes. Now, is his life better or worse because he's quadriplegic? That is up to him.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think, well, if you're quadriplegic, your life has to suck. And that's where I take exception. And that's why maybe I don't get to take the stand as often as I used to in litigation cases. Because you're right, Pat. To make a strong case, you have to show that, okay, here's where this person's functioning was. Here's where it is now. And that is clearly worse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it probably does include some deficits, changes, things like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that their life is worse, but that's not what the attorneys want us to say on the stand. I think from a human life perspective, and maybe we have to separate out, okay, here's the litigation, here's the culpability, here's the compensation piece of this that we can assist people with, because I believe that people need to be responsible for their actions, and if there's something that happens where there's culpability, then there should be appropriate compensation. I believe that. But I believe that this thing that happened makes that person's life worse. No, I don't. It might be more painful, more difficult. That doesn't necessarily equate to worse, because that is a value judgment. And I have seen far too many examples of people like my friend who's quadriplegic, who are using that element of their life to improve not only their own life, but the lives of those that they love. And then they reach out to others far beyond their own family to inspire and motivate people to take a higher level of responsibility in their own life. And ultimately, Pat, I think that's where we help people the most. Even if they were to get a compensation for their injury, if their mind is in a negative mode, it will not improve their life. In fact, I've seen several cases where getting money makes it worse. It magnifies the principles that they're already internalizing. I remember a routine that Bill Cosby did years ago, where he was talking about drug use and he just didn't get it. And so he's interviewing this kid about drugs. What's the deal with drugs? And this kid says, oh man, it intensifies your personality. And Bill's response was, yeah, but what if you're an idiot? And unfortunately, Pat, I think that's what happens sometimes when we add money to a victim mentality. It doesn't necessarily improve their life. And I don't know, that could bring up all kinds of ethical conversations that we could have. But I think it's helpful, at least for purposes of our discussion here, to separate our role as an advocate for someone who's legitimately in a position to receive compensation for an injury or a misdeed versus what's really going to help people to have a better life despite or sometimes because of the adversities or the challenges that come into their life.
Do you think it's something that you can learn? Or are you born positive? Or are you taught to be positive in your childhood? Where does that come from?
That is a fascinating question, and it's one that's being addressed quite aggressively in the research, in the literature that's already been done in psychology. And there is some support for the idea that at least a portion of this is built in to who you are. It's in your genes, it's in your DNA. You're predisposed toward one way or another. There's also very, very compelling evidence now that this is a skill set that can be trained and that can be taught, can be learned. And that, I think, is good news. I can't remember all of the percentages that came from these studies, but there is evidence for both, that yes, there's a component that seems to be genetic or inborn, and there's a larger component here where it can be trained and taught. And that's why trainings or coaching in this area can be helpful as people start to integrate a new skill set. But it's kind of like saying, is it a choice? You know, you hear happiness is a choice. Okay. Yes, it is. And it's a skill set. Like playing the piano. Playing the piano is a choice. Anybody can choose it. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously a skill set. So it's not enough to just choose it. You have to get an instructor, and you have to sign up for lessons, and you have to do the practice. My daughter teaches piano lessons, Pat. And I don't know how she does this, but she can tell. She can tell if this student comes back the next week and hasn't practiced. I don't know how she can tell. Well, obviously because the skill set hasn't developed.
Right.
And we're most likely to do whatever our mind's already programmed to do. So if we're really used to negativity, that's going to come pretty easily to us.
Oh, it'll become the default.
Yes, and that's why we have to be very cautious as helping professionals in this area about making that our primary mode of thinking. Because that not only affects how we can assist our clients, but it impacts our own happiness and joy our relationship. It impacts every aspect of our life. If we get too sucked into negativity, it's going to have a profound impact. Just like practicing the skill set of positivity can increase your happiness, your joy, your confidence in relationships. I love the research that's coming out now about positivity and the positive impacts that it can have in every aspect of our life.
Now, if we feel ourselves slipping into negativity, what tips can you share with us as to how we can arrest that slide down into the pit?
Love it. There's some brain hacks. Okay, you ready for some brain hacks? This gets down to two primary processes that drive everything: evaluation and creation. Now, these are both processes that our mind engages in. For evaluation, we're constantly judging our life. Okay? Just notice that you are. I'm not here to say stop judging, because I don't think we can. I think we're constantly judging ourselves, our relationships, our finances, our clientele. Just notice that you are. When you judge, it implies comparison with some standard. So when I say my life is difficult, I'm comparing it to one that would be easier. If I say my life is easy, I'm comparing it to one that would be more difficult. And I'll give you the brain hack here in just a minute, but to illustrate it, I had a young man on my podcast named Gabe Adams. Go Google him. You'll see a viral video that came out. My podcast episode with him was titled, "No Arms, No Legs, No Problem." This 20-year-old young man has no arms and no legs. I shared with you before the recording, Pat, that I just had my surgical summer. I had both of my Achilles tendons repaired. My foot hurts. All right. Gabe's response to that would be, "You have a foot?" Now, is the pain real? Yeah. And so is my foot. So here's the hack. Focus on what you have, not what you don't. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't. And the fastest way I know to get there is through gratitude. Gratitude. That's the hack. In fact, if you were to do a list of 5 things every day for which you are sincerely grateful, just try this for 5 days. I call it the gratitude power-up. You're sincerely grateful. Now you get 2 freebies. 2 things that are easy to be grateful for, like, sunshine and health and rainbows and puppies and indoor plumbing. Okay, those are freebies because anybody can be grateful for that. The other 3 every day have to be from your hard list. That foot that's hurting, the cancer diagnosis, the accident that occurred. What if you could take those hard things in your life and find something in it for which you are sincerely grateful? Now, this changes your mind because, like I said earlier on, Pat, we have a tendency as human beings to take something that is hard, difficult, or painful and conclude that it is bad. It's not bad. It's just hard, difficult, and painful.
Yeah.
What can you find in that for which you are sincerely grateful? Okay, now that's the power. So if you were to do this for 5 days, you're going to come up with 25 things, and don't repeat anything on tomorrow's list that was on today's list. 25 things for which you are sincerely grateful, and over half of them are about the hard stuff. This changes the energy of your brain to do the next thing. Okay, here's the other brain hack. For the same 5 days, come up with some little thing or some big thing that you could do to make your life better by 8. I'm not saying next week, next month, or next year. We're going into the creation mode now, okay? Better by 8. If there's some little thing, sometimes people don't get this right up front. So check this out. Could you do something to make sure your life is worse by 8? Oh, yeah. Now, you'd never do this on purpose, but look how quickly your mind can come up with half a dozen ways to pull that off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even take very long. You don't need till 8 to do it. We're shifting the direction of that. Come up with some little thing or big thing that you could do between now and 8 o'clock to make sure that things are a little better by 8. If you'll do that for the same 5 days, you get to have 10 upgrades in your life that you came up with on purpose, and it doesn't matter where you're starting from. I don't care if you're quadriplegic or you have no arms and legs. You can still engage in better by 8. For the gratitude, power up, and better by 8. Those are the 2 quickest ways that I know to get yourself into a positive mindset, regardless of what your circumstances are. Doesn't matter. And any of our clients could improve their life. Without the help of the attorney, without the settlement, they can improve their life. Now, we might have to handle that on the DL, Pat, because you don't necessarily want to go on stand and say, no, I don't think this person's life has to suck.
You would quickly lose the client if you were working for the plaintiff attorney.
You lose the client, you lose the attorney, you quit getting referrals.
Right, exactly.
And I don't miss them too much because I'm really focused on just helping people upgrade their lives now. And there's a lot of really great, competent professionals, including many who are listening to this podcast today, who can fill that role and assist people to get the equitable compensation that is appropriate given their circumstances. Now, beyond that, see what we can do to make sure our own life doesn't get sucked into negativity. And maybe we can share that with some people that would really be empowered to know.
And if our listeners are interested in finding out more about you, about your book, about your services, what would be the best place for them to head to?
There's 2 really great places you can go. One is my website, drpauljenkins.com, spelled with a DR, drpauljenkins.com. We're making some revisions to that website, which will make it even easier to connect to some of the resources, including a promotion that we're doing here in the next couple of weeks, where they can get a free copy of my book, Pathological Positivity. All they have to do is pay the shipping, and I'll ship it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be available on the website. The other place, Pat, is YouTube, where I'm having all kinds of fun putting out daily videos on a variety of topics related to positivity, how we can apply that in our relationships, in our work, in our life in so many ways, including positive parenting. That's one of our particular focuses on that channel. So you find that at YouTube. Just go to YouTube and look for the channel Live on Purpose TV. Live on Purpose TV. Or you can just type in my name, Dr. Paul Jenkins, and you'll find me.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your positivity with our audience and giving us some techniques and, I think most importantly, a shift in perspective. If anyone listening has struggled with negativity, I hope that listening to Paul has inspired you and helped you think about your circumstances in a little different way. Maybe it's the perfect life for you.
Wow. That could be a change in shift in focus.
It could. Thank you,
Awesome.
Paul.
Honored to be on this show, Pat. Thank you.
And thank you to you who's listening to this show. Be sure to tell other legal nurse consultants about Legal Nurse Podcast and come back next week. We'll have a new interview, a new topic, and a new guest.